Hello, and welcome to another U.S. Tech Workers podcast. I am your host, Kevin Lynn. I'm the founder of U.S. Tech Workers and the executive director of Progressives for Immigration Reform. Today is Friday, October 4th, and I am joined by two fantastic guests to recap what happened last week in Washington, D.C. I am joined by Jessica Vaughan of the Center for Immigration Studies. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Kevin.
And I am joined by Roger Ross, who has now become a part and a valued member of U.S. Tech Workers. Roger, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kevin.
Well, great to have you both here today, because boy, do we have a lot to unpack. As everyone knows, certainly who's on our newsletter distribution list and has been watching television, the bill S.386, the attempt to pass it via unanimous consent, went down in flames last week. And it was actually Senator Durbin who raised the objection that killed it. But truth be told, there were other senators in the offing who would have objected to this really bad piece of legislation, and especially the underhanded way they attempted to pass it without any debate on the floor. So, Jessica, can we start off with you and kind of, if you want to just give like a synopsis of how you saw things unfolding last week?
Well, as people probably remember, there was a hold on this bill that was put on by Senator Rand Paul. And he was, it turned out, was willing to lift that hold when they came back from the summer recess by allegedly getting Senator Mike Lee, the sponsor of the bill, to agree to a carve out to allow for more admission for nurses to come in, because that's one of the occupational groups that is not largely citizens of India, the country that would benefit from this ending of the per-country caps. And so he was willing to lift his hold. So it looked like they were going to be able to move this bill through unanimous consent without any hearings, no amendments, no public debate, unless another senator came forward to block it. And there was a lot of speculation, who's going to do it? There were some groups calling their own senators saying, please, please put a block on this. And it turned out that Senator David Perdue stepped forward to prevent this from going forward, although he made a very curious speech on the Senate floor explaining his reasons. He basically said, well, I agree with this bill, but I'm worried about the provision for nurses. I don't think that's going to do the trick. And so we all became concerned that there was another backroom deal that was about to be made for nurses that would allow, and essentially benefiting not really nurses, certainly not American nurses, but their employers, the hospitals and the nursing homes, who would rather bring in foreign nurses from abroad than open up slots in American nursing schools for Americans who want these jobs. It's the same, very parallel situation to what's happened in the tech industry.
Right. Why invest in Americans? Why take on the liabilities of Americans, where you're probably going to have a host of benefits you might have to pay people, a workforce that is more quiescent, less apt to be exploited by the employer. Yeah, this is, and it sounds to me, it's funny. It's like, this bill is, will be great, but hey, it'll be better if I get a carve out for my special interest.
Right, which is the exact reason why this kind of a bill is a bad idea, because of the Me Too-ism that happens. If there is one particular country that benefits from a piece of legislation, every other country wants the same deal, whether it's Ireland, the Philippines, China, you name it. So again, it looked like this bill was going to become kind of a bargaining chip for special interests, until finally at the very 11th hour, really, I think the morning that there was supposed to be a vote on it, if I remember correctly, Senator Durbin came forward and said, no, I'm going to put a hold on it. And the reason that he gave for it, and this came after he held a very well-attended town hall kind of a meeting in the lobby of a Senate office building.
Right, and Roger was actually there at that coffee he was holding.
A coffee, right.
Roger, do you want to tell us a little bit about how, what you saw developing at that session with Senator Durbin?
Right. So we attended the coffee meet and greet, and this is something that is a tradition of Senator Durbin to host. And there was word out on the street that he was hosting one. And what better time than, this bill possibly being brought to a unanimous consent vote by Senator Lee. And it happened to be on a Thursday where there was the theory that Senator Lee was going to bring that bill up later in the afternoon for a unanimous consent vote. So we noticed that a lot of representation against the legislation showed up in large numbers. And I don't think even the Immigration Voice folks anticipated a large opposition group that would show up to voice their opinions against this legislation. And people from all over the country, some took overnight flights from San Francisco, some came from Kansas, a lot of them were from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and DC itself. So a huge crowd showed up, and predominantly these groups were foreign nationals from Iran and China, and a little bit from Taiwan. And yeah, they were just deeply upset that this was being brought to a unanimous consent vote, again from Senator Lee, and they felt that there was probably a chance that this would pass. So they all showed up to the coffee meet and greet. Obviously a large portion of them were not constituents, but I think at that point, Senator Durbin was open to anyone joining the coffee meet and greet because this was a serious conversation that needed to be had. And he expressed his concern that this legislation will pit one nation against other nations, and other nations would fall victim of a backlog of their own. And he also went into the math behind it, given that there's a finite amount of employment-based green cards available each year. Removing country caps is not going to cure this issue.
Right. Exactly. I'm going to bring up a slide, and I think the slide is emblematic of where the contention is. Because for the uninitiated, now this is a U.S. tech workers podcast, so all the tech workers are very familiar with this. And this was a slide that was actually, I borrowed from the multinational coalition against this. Mm-hmm. And the problem every other ethnic group except India has with this bill is it will allow our employment-based green card system to be dominated by people from one country for the next 10 years. And that's the country of India. And the reason that there are so many, the backlog is so great among Indians is because so many Indians have come here on the H-1B visa. And that's something I really want to talk about with the both of you, and how the dual intent nature of that visa has helped to create this backlog. And that to me has to be solved. But for those out there, take a look at this diagram, and this tells you what's going on, because essentially what it means is if you are here waiting for a green card, unless you're from India, your wait isn't that long. And the reason it's long for Indians is we have that 7% country cap. And S.386 The whole purpose of that bill is to remove those country caps, make it a first come, first serve. So this essentially, if you're Irish, if you're Polish, if you're Chinese, if you're Filipino, if you're from Mexico, and you're waiting in line to get an employment-based green card, well, you're going to be there 12 years if this bill goes through. And Jessica, your thoughts on what I just said in terms of the bill being unfair to a number of groups, but then also one of the, what is the, which kind of gets at the harm, the consequence of this bill going through. And we saw it because you spoke about the carve out that Rand Paul wanted for an interest group, an industry group. And then you mentioned that Purdue didn't see that as big enough. So ultimately what this could lead to is the need to generate way more green cards than already exist, don't you think?
Yes, I think the backers of this who are primarily big tech employers who have essentially created this business model that's been very profitable for them of substituting cheaper workers from overseas who come in on H-1B visas for American workers. And part of the deal for the contract visa worker is that there will be a green card for them at the end of their time period as a temporary worker. So they have been sold this arrangement on those terms. That's what their employers tell them. You know, you only have to do this for a period of time until your green card comes through. And Congress has created a provision in our law that allows people who have come in on as temporary workers to stay indefinitely until their turn comes up for a permanent immigrant visa or green card.
Right. So even though the H-1B, it's a 3-year term, which is typically extended 3 years, so 6 years. But if you're here and you exercise that dual intent nature and you get your sponsor to buy off on sponsoring you for a green card, you could stay indefinitely.
That's right. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is that some people have thought that, well, these people are going to be sent home. The Indians who've been waiting this time are eventually going to have to go home. That's not true. They're allowed to stay here indefinitely in their current job until their turn comes for a green card. They still have that job. The American that they replaced does not have that job. So it's not fair to the American workers. The other common misunderstanding on this issue is that the per country cap limits any citizens of one country to 7% of the total number of visas available. That's not actually the way it works. The per country cap is more like a meter. And it basically does not let any one country get more than 7% until the worldwide demand is exhausted. So everybody's paying 7% until everyone gets at least some visas. At that point, if the total number of 140,000 visas are not used up, any numbers that are not used go to people who have been in line the longest. And that is almost always citizens of India. So as a result, they don't get 7% of the employment green cards. Nowadays, they're getting more like 20%. So that's already a disproportionate share. So I think that's important to point out that it's not like, okay, you've hit 7%, you're done. It's not like that at all. It's just a way to spread around the availability of these visas so that U.S. employers have access to a global talent pool. That's the whole point of it.
And it's not high skilled workers that are looking to attract per se. You look at the vast majority of these H-1B visa holders, they're skill levels 1 and 2. They compete directly with our college graduates. They compete directly with people who have been in the workforce for a while.
Right. And I have to say, it's important to understand when considering Senator Durbin's role in this whole episode is that he has for many, many years been very skeptical and concerned about this business model of replacing American workers with H-1B visa holders, and has for a long time been looking for a way to reform the system so that it doesn't replace American workers and doesn't lead to this problem that we have now of one country having lots of people who've bought into, you know, who've come here feeling entitled to a green card even though they come as a temporary worker. And so, you know, his objections are, he has talked about his objections in terms of wanting more visas to solve the problem, but he is well aware of the problems in the temporary worker system that have created this issue. And so I just think that's important to point out, that ending the per country cap is really the most insidious thing about it. Is not, you know, as much the problem of people from one country coming, but the fact that it's rewarding this business model of replacing American workers who, and the replacements happen to come from one particular country because the companies that invented this business model to take advantage of our visa system happen to come from that country. They're the Indian outsourcing companies. And a lot of their clients are American corporations who are helping fund this effort to
Right. I love to say follow the money. And you look at who's backing this. It's the Business Roundtable. So the Fortune 100 companies in the United States. It's Facebook with their Forward US. You know, they want this pool of easily exploitable, inexpensive workers. They do not want to hire Americans, whether they're recent graduates or whether they've been in the workforce for a while. They're just too expensive.
Right, and we can't, and so the people who, yes, they may have been waiting a long time, but there's also a lot of fraud and abuse in the visa program that they came in on, and they're not particularly, in most cases, uniquely well qualified workers. They're just ordinary workers who were willing to do the job for less, and that's why they got the job, and that's why they're here. So the idea of putting them on a fast track for permanent residency makes no sense. It's but there's this narrative out there that these are highly skilled individuals, and why are we making it hard for them? That's not the case at all. And this is not a system that we should be rewarding and encouraging by making the whole thing easier for the people participating in it. And you know, we need to have an opportunity for our government to root out the fraudulent cases, which are turning up. It seems like just about every month now, there's a big prosecution of someone who brought in hundreds of workers on H-1B visas by fraud. We should not be converting them quickly to green cards.
No, we should not. And there should be an awful lot more scrutiny going on with regard to the need for that particular worker in the workforce and how competitive they are with an American worker. All that needs to get taken in to consider, you know, needs to be considered in this mix. We're starting to see some positive things, but I don't see policy really aligning among the USCIS and DHS at this time to do that. One thing I'd like to share with the two of you and get your feedback on, Senator Mike Lee, the sponsor of this bill, we talked about him earlier, he came out with a press release on October 2nd, 2 days ago, and he referred to our claims as fake news. And I'm gonna pull that up, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this because I was kind of boiling over when I was reading it. Okay, can you guys see the screen with the Mike Lee, US Senator for Utah?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so he says here, Senator Mike Lee issued the following statement saying that Lou Dobbs falsely claimed on cable television that S.386 would double the size of H-1B visas. Okay, Roger, true or false?
Well, it's both actually. So what I think the clear message is that because of the dual intent nature of the H-1B, the pipeline is getting clogged because more and more of these folks coming in through this business model, if they want to stay here permanently, they just keep piling up once they get sponsored for an employment-based green card. So that number seems to be growing, but it doesn't, this legislation doesn't increase the quota of H-1B visas. So that remains at 85,000. That's capped, 65,000 for our regular workers, and then an additional 20,000 for graduate degree holders that graduated within the United States. And then there's obviously some uncapped quotas
uncapped for nonprofits and things like that.
Right. So it doesn't increase those numbers. So, that part should be clear. It's not increasing those numbers, but because of the dual intent nature of this, it's going to keep creating a whole bigger backlog until they address, what they can do to fix this dual intent portion of the process.
Okay. Jessica, true or false with that?
I would say unknown, because we don't really know what the unintended consequences would be of ending the per-country caps. And one thing that would happen for sure is that it would increase the attractiveness of this program for people coming in on an H-1B, knowing that they'll be able to stay indefinitely until they get a green card. And the other half of it is that because the per-country caps would cut off the ability of employers to bring in people from other parts of the world, they would have to go through come in on an H-1B instead of being hired directly on a green card for the more highly skilled, unique workers that come in from the rest of the world who don't have to wait as long as a citizen of India does. So I think it would do, as Roger said, it increased the pool that's backing up, waiting for a green card, but also increase demand for those H-1B visas. So we don't really know how big that would get.
Right, and we've seen it even before this bill is passed. Again, going back to Rand Paul's carve out, Purdue's carve out. This will happen and this is exactly what happened following the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, the Immigration Reform Act of 1990. The industry began to cry that they couldn't bring the skilled workers they needed. The groups that had their allocations weren't going to surrender any of those allocations to bring in these more specialized needed workers. And so we just ended up increasing the entire pool altogether.
And it starts to become an issue in trade agreements as well. There was a period under the Bush administration where they started carve-outs for people from Singapore and people from Chile. And then there was a new category added separately equivalent to H-1Bs for Australia. And there was talk of doing this for Ireland. So that's where the Me Too-ism comes to play, both for occupations and for different countries. And if, and that's how the pool grows, because everybody wants their little set aside.
So Kevin, yeah, exactly. So Senator Lee is very smart in pointing out that this doesn't increase the numbers, as are a lot of Republican senators. They say it doesn't increase the number of visas, but they don't realize the unintended consequences that once this legal immigration system becomes a train wreck, a lot of other countries are going to be protesting, just as the Indian workers are doing right now, saying, why am I in a 12-year backlog? I want my green card now. And then Congress will be forced to increase the number of green cards. And this is the sentiment that has been passed along by Congresswoman Zoe Loughran's office. They said, yeah, we know that this is not going to solve the backlog, and we want the chaos to happen. We want the system to malfunction, and maybe Congress will then push to grow those numbers. So this is the systematic approach that they're doing.
This is the nose of the camel in the tent to do that. And that to me, it enrages me, because we've seen from history what happens with this, because this isn't comprehensive reform. This is a throw out to, again, special interests. Okay, the second paragraph here. 100% agree with the White House that the H-1B program should not be used to displace or replace American workers. That is why S.386 contains strong new anti-fraud provisions as to make sure employers cannot abuse the H-1B system to undercut American workers, Senator Lee said. Jessica, true or false?
False. First of all, the bill did not include anything that actually prevents or makes it illegal to replace an American worker with a visa worker. It's absent from the legislation. It did include some helpful provisions that would make it easier to police fraud, but it would not actually change the criteria for awarding H-1B visas to, or do anything to prevent American workers from being replaced. And I mean, I would argue that if Senator Lee is so concerned about how many American workers have been replaced, then he shouldn't be doing this bill, because the people he's rewarding are the ones who replaced the Americans, both the employers and the employees.
Beautiful. Roger, your thoughts?
Absolutely agree with Jessica on this one. You know, the Grassley amendments, a lot of those policies are already in effect.
Well, they're in effect, but not being enforced, correct?
Not being enforced, because now it would turn the Department of Labor into, a fee-based program, where now that they're generating some revenue and they're being funded by these application fees, they're going to then start hiring people to enforce or scrutinize a lot of these petitions. So the truth may be that it might create, some more scrutiny into the whole program, but it doesn't really fix the business model of these Indian consultancy companies coming in, bringing these H-1B visa workers, because they would still be able to qualify for H-1B visas. And the way Disney was able to walk away with a lawsuit was that Disney said, we didn't sponsor any of the H-1B visas. We just contracted workers from a third-party entity. So
They
if you have any issues,
simply outsourced to a body shop that happened to employ H-1B visa holders. To me, two reforms that would work is, one, outlaw the body shops. No H-1Bs awarded to the Tatas, the Infosys, the Ernst & Youngs, the Capgeminis, the HCLs, none of that. And then end this dual intent nature of the visa. This is what's creating the backlog.
absolutely.
Okay, so we have, all right, I'll pull up Lee's fake news, quote unquote, article one more time, because he talks again about the numbers. He says, S.386 is also number neutral. It does not increase the number of visas, H-1B or otherwise, in any way and under no circumstances. Will it become a vehicle for increasing overall immigration levels? And then he goes on to say, it ends the discriminatory current policy that punishes green card applications from large countries. I won't read any more, but Jessica, your thoughts on that?
This line about it not increasing legal immigration is just a shiny object that they're holding out there to distract people. And frankly, I think they did it to try to prevent some of the activist groups like Numbers USA from taking a stance, and it worked. But again, that's not the point. The point is, the system we have is dysfunctional, it's abused, it's harmful to American workers, and it should not be rewarded and strengthened with this measure. And, again, if they're so concerned about discriminatory practices, discriminatory effects, they should look at the hiring practices of some of these body shops that are bringing in people, because there's been a series of lawsuits against some of these companies for their discriminatory hiring practices in favor of South Asians coming, mostly from India. So,
and
that's
rightly so. I mean, this practice that's been going on for over 2 decades has pushed EEOC back 40 years. certainly in the STEM fields. So big issue there. I'm just, again, for Senator Lee to say what Lou Dobbs stated on his show, call it fake news, is just rubbish. Roger, your thoughts before we leave Senator Lee's precedent?
Yeah, it's the same comments coming from most of the Republicans. Even Congressman Dan Crenshaw went on Instagram and said the same sentiments. He says it doesn't increase immigration visa numbers. So, there's nothing wrong with this bill. We're just trying to prioritize people that are stuck in a backlog. And this kind of misinformation is why people, didn't look at this bill that closely. But then when other immigrant groups actually worked out the math behind all this, they said, wait a minute, we're going to get screwed really badly, and we're going to be waiting 12 to 15 years. From the Cato Institute, they keep adding the number of years in their research studies that they come out. First, it was 8 years. Now they've said it's 9 years. And as we know, the government doesn't function properly according to our models.
Right, exactly. And if anyone wants to feel for historically how these things work out, I strongly recommend picking up a copy of Eugene McCarthy's book. You might recall Eugene McCarthy, the late senator, very liberal senator from the state of Minnesota. He wrote a book, and the book is Colony of the World. And he talks about as you had mentioned, the unintended consequences. He talks about the unintended consequences of the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, where unintentionally Congress increased immigration numbers by 40%. Again, it's these carve-outs, it's the special interests, it's the consequences of the legislation that lead to this. And this is absolutely positively going to happen if we remove the country caps. And if we don't, Frank, go ahead.
Sorry. Exactly. I mean, these are the unintended consequences. And, the Congress is trying to double down on more mistakes. And their solution seems to be, with respect to Senator Durbin, he feels that we should increase the green card numbers. Well, you have to understand what caused these backlogs in the first place, and you have to address the source of the issue. And what Congress is trying to do is focus on the symptoms and not the cause. And all these legislations, as we have seen, first it was the H-1B, then they introduced OPT, and then they extended OPT to 3 years, and then they made H-1B into a dual intent, and then now there's H-4EAD. These are just adding to the crisis. And there should be some sympathy for the Indian nationals, because a lot of Congress is just toying with their lives. Granted that there's a lot of abuse to the program, but you're growing that level of noise, because this backlog is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you made the promise that you were going to give them green cards. They're coming and marching at the doors and asking something to be done real quickly.
And let's talk about those that are asking for that. I'm going to pull up a post by Immigration Voice, and this came out 2 days ago, October 2nd. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is one of the most vitriolic things that I've heard in this whole debate. And it goes Immigration Voice. And Immigration Voice, again, is basically the main lobbying group that the money gets funneled into, that puts the pressure on Congress. And we, in the last year, exposed the kind of fraud that they've been engaged in, where they have their people call into a congressional office, and they have Zillow up, the real estate site, up on their computers, and they'll find a zip code and a resident, like an apartment address within that congressman's district, and they'll say they're from there. Things like that been going on with Immigration Voice, but boy, the vitriol in this. Like I start off, we've heard we've been told it's unwise to speak truth to power in Washington. We've been told Democrats in the Senate are much more hierarchical and senators are afraid to speak up and stand up to Senator Durbin. Where would they go? Boy, I'll go down this a little bit.
Well, it was a hit piece. You know, they made a promise that they were going to get this bill passed. They've kept making these promises for a very long time. Their hired lobbyist, Leon Fresco, has been tweeting about how he's confident that he's going to get this bill passed. He's been saying it for several years now. And if people aren't aware, Leon Fresco is the architect of the Gang of Eight bill that didn't go anywhere. And
yeah, interesting.
yeah, so, you know, this is just for them to save face. They have misled a lot of Indian nationals, and they're just trying to blame this on Senator Durbin and the Democrats. You know, I read the whole post. They seem to think that this is going to cause a domino effect where, since Senator Durbin has objected, now he's going to inform other major Democrats to also object to this bill because it, you know, favors only one immigrant group over the others.
See, that's interesting in that, so we have, you know, and that is you know, I do feel sorry for those workers that have been brought over here. There was a study done 3 years ago, or a survey, and is basically measuring the desire for people to leave their home country. And in India, they found that 70% of the population would leave India if they could. Now, frankly, I think the caste system has a lot to do with that. But interesting enough, it seems the group that comes over here are all from the Brahmin class, one of the more elite classes in India. But I do have empathy for what they're going through. But at the same time, you know, what's being done with, and you look at the way they're attacking Senator Durbin on this, it's the way and this is nothing compared to the way they've attacked activists who've been against the bill. Roger, I know you personally have felt what it feels like to be doxxed by this crowd and have you and your family attacked by them. So this is the kind of folks we're dealing with in this fight. And they're not alone. There are other groups out there that, although now they seem to be against 386, their goal seems to be that of simply increasing the number of green cards that are out there. And you know, groups that come to mind are like All of Us. Are you guys familiar with them?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, again, it speaks to kind of where ultimately we are going with the consequences should this bill pass. It would increase the demand for green cards, or the demand for green cards and speedy acquisition of those green cards by every other group that is now being shuttered out of the system. And that seems to be what All of Us is saying. Hey, everyone, come with us. We're just going to demand that Congress issue more green cards.
Yeah, because that's the inevitable result of doing this is since it's not going to fix the backlog, it's going to get worse. More people are going to complain, and we will be told that the only answer is to increase the number of green cards. You know, and that's harmful to our country and to American workers, you know, on so many levels. And they were really counting on, as Roger said, these activists with Immigration Voice were told that this was going to be done. It really reinforces what I've sensed in my own personal interactions with the folks who've been lobbying for this, is that they felt that they were entitled to this green card, even though, and I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation either on social media or in person with some of these activists, and I would say, but you came on a temporary visa. there was no guarantee of a green card. It says that nowhere. It says temporary. No, 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 no. We were told that, this is a permanent visa. And, there was no telling them otherwise. They, unfortunately, were sold some snake oil, or they diluted themselves. But I do think that this sense of entitlement is what is part of behind this really harsh blowback against Senator Durbin, this lashing out at him. I've never seen such a nasty letter from an immigrants or quote unquote immigrants rights group ever. Not even people with who are looking with DACA who are looking for green cards. Not after the Gang of Eight bill went down or the Kyle Busch Kennedy bill before that. This was really, really vicious, and I'm sure part of it is because they were led to believe that this was a done deal. But I think the tone also was set by the architect in chief, Leon Fresco, who came out from the get-go saying, if you're opposed to this bill, then you are a racist, maybe a professional racist or a bigot or something. But he set the tone, and they picked right up on it, and now are calling anybody who opposes it, even Democratic Senator Durbin, who
really,
really,
come
like
on.
it or not, one thing that he's been pretty consistent on is pushing bills for more immigration. It's shocking, and they did themselves no favors.
Absolutely. I mean, they're calling him a racist against Indian people, and I'm like, well, his general counsel is an Indian guy, so if he was
they
racist,
said that was just tokenism.
Yeah, but Roger, you're a racist too, right? In their eyes, I mean, they've called you out as a racist.
I have said we need to have a rational dialogue about this. I'm calling out the immigration system. No one wants to have that conversation because they know that the system is flawed. They have abused the program. And if any of this comes into light, they will all be affected by it. Now, a lot of truly high-skilled Indian nationals have spoken to me and said, I agree with you. This bill will not emphasize the truly high-skilled people that are stuck in the backlog. This notion that it's also merit-based, and this is something that even Senator Perdue alluded to, that this is in line with what President Trump wants, a merit-based program. S.386 is not merit-based. It doesn't prioritize people based on their skills. It's a first come, first serve. So whoever submitted their application first gets first dibs. So all these doctors or rocket scientists that are allegedly in the backlog, this system does not prioritize them.
Great. Well, we're getting to that time where we probably should start to wind things down. I'd like to hear from the both of you what you think the prospects of 386 are at this point, because Congress will be back on October 15th. My thought is they're going to be pretty preoccupied with appropriations and budgets. I don't know if they want to deal with this. Jessica, your thoughts?
Well, there have been some rumors that someone would try to attach it to a spending bill, but I think that's a non-starter. They tried that before, and I think going through this effort to pass it through unanimous consent and the rushed way that it was put through in the House, and all of your activists' efforts in educating people about it really opened some eyes. And
I got to tell you, Jessica, I am so proud. I mean, activists from all over this country, as I say, that they heard the call, they started making calls, writing letters. Many came and walked the halls over the last year and a half, met with their legislators. It was just amazing to watch people kind of understand. It was almost like, civics had been this lost art, and now you see people actively engaged in, as citizens. And what I like to tell people is, and what's kind of missed in the prize that has become U.S. citizenship is it's not just about rights, and it's about responsibilities. we as citizens, all of us, regardless of whether you were naturalized, native born, your ethnicity, religion, anything, gender, we have responsibilities to each other and safeguarding this country, not just for the present, but for many, many generations to come. And it was kind of cool to see activists rise up, understand that, and, you know, take to the halls of Congress.
I agree. It was a beautiful thing. And I think if the bill were presented again another time and they went around looking for new co-sponsors, I don't think they would find half as many as they had before because of the efforts of the activists to educate people about this.
Absolutely. I mean, you have Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is a co-sponsor, but she's now realizing that was probably a mistake, as she was also present at the coffee meet and greet. And there's a clip of her saying that I was a previous co-sponsor, maybe a slip of the tongue, but you know, she's also now realizing that this pits one immigrant group over the, you know, rest of the world. But I think in closing that, you know, all these solutions that are being thrown and new activist groups forming, like Support All of Us, you have to be very careful and try to see what is it that they're trying to do. Are they truly interested in reforming the whole system, or they're just trying to, you know, for self-interest reasons, please someone and, you know, hope to monetize over this kind of activism and drive that fear into people's heart? Oh, you Iranians are not going to get your green cards if S.386 passes, so come join us and we need your donations. And then next thing you know, the fearful Iranians who are already part of a travel ban are even more fearful, and they're like, here's my money, please help me. And they don't realize that they're